All right, Ms. Trethewey.
Good morning. I want to make one thing abundantly clear from the outset of this case, and that no one in this courtroom is going to stand here and dispute that the murder of a child is a horrific event. This is a tragic and heartbreaking case. There's simply no other way to explain it. There's no rational way to explain that. There is no dispute as to the facts regarding the events that occurred on December 8th of 2020 at 215 Mountain Vista Boulevard here in Canton. Ms. Driver does not dispute that she killed her 13-month-old baby daughter, Hannah Nicole Driver. There is also no dispute that at the same time, Ms. Driver stabbed herself repeatedly in the neck, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times, and then took the knife to her chest. There is no doubt that the evidence in this case and the testimony you're going to hear by the state and the defendant will not only be difficult to see and hear, but as we go through this trial, the only issue in this case that you need to decide is Ms. Driver's mental status and mental state at the time of the crime. Solely focus as we sit here and present all of this evidence about what happened that day, and the state does that, on her mental health. We are not standing here saying that Hannah Nicole Driver is not a victim. That is not the position taken by anybody in this case. Our job is to simply show you how we got here today, and that the law allows you to consider her mental state at the time of the crime. I'm going to give you a little bit more background information about the people involved in this case so you have some sort of context. Today, our client, Chloe, she's 24 years old. She grew up in Florida and in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. Her parents are Eric and Renee Driver. She is one of 3 children, the youngest and only daughter. Ms. Driver did have her ups and downs and bouts with teenage angst, and she, like most teenagers, thought she was ready for the world and knew best at the age of 16. She left home, she left school, she had her first fateful meeting with Ben Michael when she was 16 years old at a bus station in Atlanta. Several months after the breaking up with her boyfriend, she had just turned 17, she met up with Benjamin again. He was 38 years old. See, I'll tell you a little bit about Mr. Ben Michael. He's not this great character that the state intends to put up here. Not at all. He spends his free time setting up Christian trusts in the name of religion and his wacky beliefs. You will hear that some of these trusts include contracts that he made with his so-called wives. I'm not even going to attempt to try to explain what these trusts are, because quite frankly, we really don't understand what their thought process is involved in that, and I'm sure Mr. Stillers would love to tell you all about it. You will hear that he had 3 wives at this time. He had Jessica, he had Chloe, he had Sarah. He actually knew Jessica prior to ever meeting Chloe. But Chloe was his first wife, and Jessica came back into the picture at a later time because she had money. She had some money stashed away, and Mr. Ben Michael knew that. Sarah Stiles did come along longer. She wasn't involved in this group until after Chloe had had her baby. See, he creates contracts with each one of these women and calls them his wives in trust. You will also hear evidence that Benjamin had not only Chloe, but these other wives file during COVID for the fraudulent EDIL loan money through the Small Business Administration. He had each one of them apply for these under his Alorian Christian Trust, or other pseudo trusts that he called 501c3, a 508c something, under the Organization of Spirituality and Teaching. You will hear that they were able to get $150,000 fraudulently money sitting in the Wells Fargo account. They traveled all around the eastern United States. Sometimes they were together, sometimes they were not, depending on where he wanted each of these women. They definitely lived what we would consider an alternative lifestyle. This lifestyle didn't involve the things that you and I would normally think would be a partnership or a relationship, or the type of rules that we would necessarily agree with. There were rules of what to eat, what to wear, who they could talk to, when she would have access to her cell phone, when she'd be able to speak to her parents. Same rules applied to all three women. It was a constant indoctrination of an alternative ideology and belief system to an already vulnerable young lady. A 17, 18, and 19-year-old woman with a 38, 39, and 40-year-old man. He did assign his wives each alternative name. She'll hear in these calls and interviews they'll refer to her as Kalani. Chloe, initially, was all in this relationship. She really didn't know any better. She was shocked and awed by his personality. She was young and she was vulnerable. She became alienated from her friends and her family, and she did. She followed his teachings and belief system. He also manipulated her mind to the extent about her own belief system, about her own parents, repeatedly telling her that she could not trust her parents and that they may have done horrible things to her as a child. She couldn't and did not realize that this was essentially a cult environment. Around April of 2020, Benjamin met Jason Spillers, and they immediately became friends. He became fascinated with his trust system, the idea of having multiple women involved, quickly realized that they shared similar beliefs. To this day, they remain very close to each other. Mr. Spillers traveled around as well from place to place and was in a group on several different occasions with them, leading up to December 8th. When he was not with Benjamin or this group, he remained in constant contact via phone, text, or other means. Mr. Spillers saw Chloe in May of 2020. We'll describe her as a loving, caring mom. No issues, no signs of mental illness. In September of 2020, he noted that her mental state had deteriorated and became concerned. And he even spoke to Brian about it. There were discussions about her needing treatment and medication. But see, Mr. Ben Michael doesn't agree with pharmaceuticals. He doesn't believe with white coat intervention, as he calls it. He was not going to let her put any medication in her body because she was breastfeeding, and she needed to be pure. He also believed that he could self-diagnose and self-treat Chloe on his own. Now, there were several red flags and calls for help leading up to this event. And the state didn't tell you about it, but I'm going to. Several people who claim to love Chloe and care about her are the same people who refused to get her the help she desperately needed and asked for. Benjamin, his other wives, Jason Spillers, Chloe's own parents. They either all chose not to help her and ignored her cries for help, or they just could not break through to her in those fateful months and get her that help she so desperately needed that she asked for. The responses to her erratic behavior, her expressions of the thoughts that were in her mind to these people were ignored. Rather, in September of 2020, instead of getting her actual mental help, Benjamin convinced her to start taking CBD to help regulate herself and calm her down. You will hear testimony that they continued to feed her this CBD from Mr. Spillers that not only increased the erratic behavior, but led to an increase in her delusions and the continued degradation of her condition. There were two significant incidents that I want you to think about through this trial that show a continued decline of her mental health leading up to this and the lack of help for her deteriorating mental state. On November 25th, 2020, this group was in Asheville, North Carolina. Chloe Driver ran out of an apartment, through an apartment complex parking lot, into oncoming traffic to escape this group. She was having a major mental health crisis and episode. During that time, she was begging strangers to help her get away from him and get help. She was young, she was crazy. I expect you to hear from a lady named Sandra Torres. She is a completely independent witness. Doesn't know Benjamin, doesn't know Jason, doesn't know Chloe, who saw this young lady on that day in the middle of the road, crying and asking for help, being chased by Jason Spillers. She sees him pick her up and drag her back into that apartment. She calls 911. And what is the result of her help? She was hit by a car that Ben Yaman was driving and punched in the eye by Jason Spillers. He broke her eye socket. She will tell you that Chloe was begging for help, begging to call the police, begging them to call her parents to help. These men put Chloe in a car, put Hannah in a car, and drove away before the police could ever respond. There are police reports about this. You will hear that the next day, Thanksgiving of 2020, November 26th, that Chloe had access to her cell phone. She contacted her parents to please come and get her in Asheville, North Carolina with Hannah and help her get away. That Brian was hurting her, she was afraid, she needed help. Her parents immediately got in the car and started to make that 2-hour drive to Asheville. Benjamin went through her phone, found out that they were coming, and the result was he took the child before her parents or the police could get there. Took the child away from Chloe and kept her away from her child for over 2.5 days. There's a police report about that too. When her parents picked her up that day, Miss Driver had a black eye, the remnants of a healing black eye. It's documented in a police report as well. Chloe went with her parents. She was distraught, she was upset, she was afraid that she was never going to see her daughter again. He kept her away from the baby. I expect you to see the Facebook messages and text messages exchanged between the two that indicate the manipulation and the games he played with Chloe that day and over the course of those 2 days to get her child back. She was even more distraught because she was still breastfeeding her daughter. That was the first time that her parents had ever learned about what was going on with Chloe, both with her mental status and the relationship. Her parents were desperate to intervene. They helped her try to figure out how to get her own bank account, how to obtain Hannah's birth certificate, because they left the hospital shortly after she was born, because Mr. Ben Michael didn't want her in the system and was afraid that DFACS was going to be called. They left without a birth certificate. She feared that they would never see her daughter again. I expect you'll see a video that was taken on November 27th of 2020 with Miss Driver. That video was taken prior to Miss Driver getting in an Uber that Mr. Ben Michael sent for her to bring her back to her child. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what was going to happen to her. She didn't actually know she was being brought to her daughter. You will see the choice and the agony in Miss Driver's voice that she had to go back to get her daughter. She feared never seeing her again. You will hear evidence, and the state's already touched on it, about evidence about searches. Miss Driver did search for other things other than how to snap a neck. She did searches that were trying to, how to find a bus ticket for a 13-month-old. How do I travel with a child I don't have a birth certificate to? There are also indications that she was understanding that she was experiencing some crazy things in her mind. She searched for schizophrenia. She searched for other ways to get mental help. Things that she was being denied. And things spiraled from there. On December 7th, 2020, the group took Chloe back to her parents' house to get the last of her belongings. They begged her to stay there with Hannah. They couldn't convince her to stay, and her parents thought about calling the police. But they also realized that that might mean that they may never see their daughter or granddaughter again. And they are still living with that guilt today. The group then left and spent the night in a hotel room. The morning of the 8th, they attended a ceremony called the 12 Tribes. They then traveled towards Canton, Georgia. I expect that Mr. Spillers will tell you about a weird incident where Chloe appeared to be hallucinating or having something going on while they were at Whole Foods on the way down here. They did stop at Mr. Adlin's house to pick up some belongings that belonged to Benjamin. Chloe was in Canton for less than 3 hours that day. Throughout this case, you will hear evidence that everyone around her said Chloe wholeheartedly and loved and cared for her child. You will hear evidence that she was a loving and doting mother, that she tended to all of Hannah's needs, that that baby barely ever cried because of the love and attention that Chloe's. So you will hear that Chloe considered her an extension of herself, a huge piece of her, had a connection to her. That everything she did for her daughter was because she was an incredible mother. And I'm going to show you some pictures, put this kind of in context for you guys, so that you can see the physical changes involved in Chloe's life during this time. These pictures do not dispute a change in her physically and show a change in her mentally. This is Chloe when she was 16 years old, before she met Benjamin and Michael. This is Chloe with Hannah on July 12th, 2020. Her pride and joy. August 29th, 2020. Again, showing how prideful she is of her God. November 2020. November 27th, 2020. It's another angle from November 27th. Now, the state has charged Chloe with killing Hannah with malice and cruel intentions, and along with other counts set forth in the indictment. The evidence in this case, contrary to what the state is saying, is clear and overwhelming. The state doesn't want you to consider Chloe a victim of Benjamin or Jason Spillers. We're not even standing here saying that that is a full piece of what happened. We're not blaming Jason, we're not blaming Benjamin, we're not blaming Hannah. But what it is a bigger piece of this puzzle about Chloe's severe and untreated mental illnesses that she suffered in the months leading up to December 8th. You will also hear testimony that she did have these delusions, that she seemed paranoid, that she reported seeing signs of things that to you and I wouldn't be read that way. That that's all part of mental illness. We are not here to dispute what happened to Hannah. It is truly horrific. It is something that Ms. Driver thinks about every single day. You will hear evidence from witnesses who were with her leading up to this that contradict every aspect that on December 8th of 2020 that Chloe was in any right state of mind at all. You will hear testimony from those individuals who witnessed her day-to-day mental health breakdowns and delusions themselves. You will also hear testimony about how this investigation by the Canton Police Department was conducted from the very beginning as it related to her severe mental illness and her delusions. Ms. Driver was evaluated by several experts in this case, which will be presented to you in this case, including one from the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health. We expect that the evidence will show that every expert that comes before you will say that she was severely mentally ill, that she was delusional, and will offer diagnoses of specific mental health disorders. You will hear from experts that will tell you that she was suffering from these severe mental disturbances, paranoia, and psychosis on December 8th, and in the months leading up to the tragic event. They will tell you that they based their information on information they received from the state, from the defense, and from other collateral third parties. They will also tell you that the participation in this group, while initially may have been voluntary, turned into one of an involuntary nature from a psychological perspective. The state is aiming to present this case in such a deliberate manner aimed at eliciting raw emotional responses to what happened. That's it. They want you to ignore the elephant in the room, which is the mental health, which is a huge piece of this puzzle. Despite those initial reactions, we are asking you to think about this. Mothers just do not kill their kids. Ask yourself, what drives someone to do something like this to their baby and to themselves? What drives someone to do something like this who, by all reports, loved and cared for Hannah in the most amazing way? Listen to the evidence that is presented about what she experienced in this relationship with Benjamin and what delusions compelled her to this tragic event. Listen to what people say about her ability to know what she was doing, living minute to minute, how she'd be fine one minute, and the next thing they would describe her as erratic and crazy. There is absolutely no motive in this case for her to kill her daughter. There is no other reason for her to have killed Hannah but for her psychotic symptoms and delusions that she was under on December 8th of 2020. You'll hear that from experts, but you'll hear that from the witnesses too. This is the only explanation as to what happened, and only reason that would be supported by the evidence in this case. We believe that the evidence in this case will clearly lead you to a conclusion that at the end of this case, that she's not guilty by reason of insanity. And that still, because it's provided by law, is a way to hold her responsible for these actions. We expect that that's what the evidence will show, and that will be what we will be asking for you at the end of this case. Thank you.
All right, you can go ahead and distribute the notepads and pencils, but we are going to take a recess. We are going to take a recess until 11 o'clock. You can go downstairs if you would like to the jury assembly room. Don't talk to anybody about the case. Don't let anybody talk to you about the case. And be back up here in the jury room at 11 o'clock.